Good evening, everybody. Apologies for the slightly late starts, and for the speakers, there's slightly less people will be observing online, but actually positive from that, you will have far more people watching your presentations because we'll share it with all of the members and the world of media and LinkedIn. So you will actually have more people watching it than the people actually joining us this evening. So to catch up time, I'd just like to hand over to Paul. Is that right? To do
yes,
a quick introduction.
Well, first of all, a warm welcome to you, and I'm going to just give a quick introduction. I have to say I'm not familiar with the equipment here, so if I do make mistakes, forgive me. It tells me all I have to do is press one button, and it should.
To the right.
It should work. Oh, here we are. Right, so we've had a welcome from Richard, who is the chairman of the South West of England branch of the North Institute. This is the first time we've met since we actually had an interesting conference at the university where we had an attendance which was exceeded the capacities of the room. And that was the first time we'd ever done that. But we're now kicking off onto a seasonal programme. And I think we sort of get a little bit of the lag back from the sort of pandemic problems which we've had in the past. The basic sort of thing I want to just introduce what the World Maritime Day is about. And then we've got two speakers who are going to talk on issues associated with clean and green energy. I was going to talk about safer seas, innovations in navigation. I have put that in there. If we haven't enough time, I will in fact work on that one. And then we'll have some questions and answers. So there we are, that's the programme. We're delighted to welcome Dr. Richard Pemberton, good to see you. And I'm delighted to welcome Mr. Adrian Bartlett, who I'm sure going to give us a very interesting talk. And
Sorry.
Roger's going to talk, is he?
No.
Which really is pretty much of what the theme is today. The business about World Maritime Day, just sort of to give you some idea, it's celebrated on the last Thursday of every September, and it happens to be on the 29th of September this year, which is basically set up by the International Maritime Organization to honour the tireless work of the international maritime industry. And it is the International Maritime Organization's assembly which chooses the themes for each year's celebrations. So the World Maritime Day is important because we all recognise that shipping is the backbone of the global economy, but more than 80% of the world trade is transported by the shipping industry, and the people who keep the world trade running are the maritime workers and sometimes get forgotten. And so the idea is, in fact, to raise the awareness of persons on an associated theme about the mariners and those working in the maritime industries because of the importance of their role. The theme this year is new technologies for greener shipping. And that, of course, reflects a great deal of interest. And again, it came up at our large conference that there was all sorts of issues about green shipping. Some things which have been resolved, some things which are not resolved. It's a transition period, moving from one technology to another technology, and that's always very difficult. Because like you, okay, and like me, I've been used to one fuel only. That's either petrol in my car or diesel in my van. But now, okay, we've got to think differently. And one of the big issues is, in fact, what fuel do we use? And in the shipping business, we're talking about assets which are built to last up to 40 years. Certainly on the greener sort of ships, such as transporting the gases around the world. And so it is quite relevant, okay, to be talking about it now, because 40 years ahead brings us into 2062, well after the 2050 deadline for zero carbon. So that's the idea behind it. This green transition is going to be a problem because there are a variety of different methods which can be used and moving us into a sustainable future. And that is what this is all about. The idea, of course, is that nobody is left out of this sort of business. The small players as well as the large players are in fact are involved, and certainly the actual the Secretary General of the IMO wishes that to be the case. We've not been sort of forgetting the World Maritime Day, and over the years we in fact had several talks We started actually in 2008, and it surprises me to think that 2008 is now 14 years back. That's when we started running the World Maritime Day sort of event at Plymouth. And we started off very big, very grand. We had the Admiral of the Fleet down here. We certainly had the President of the North Institute and the Vice Chancellor to our first meetings. And we also had a big spread of food, which lots of people enjoyed. Things have changed a little bit, but we have been regularly, in fact, celebrating this day. And these are some of the actual talks we've had. 2012 was an interesting one. It was the actual 100 years after the Titanic, and safety at sea was in fact the focus. And there we had a gentleman who just written a book on the actual way that the actual Marine Accident Investigation Branch would look at the Titanic, in fact, 100 years on. That was interesting. Sustainable development is even there in 2013, and you can see the various elements there. 2014 IMO conventions, lots of conventions, okay, and we're all aware of MARPOL, okay, and particularly many of you are aware of Annex 6, okay, which is involved with, in fact, emissions. The question is, how do we effectively implement those sort of grand designs and desires? Maritime education and training, particularly for all countries, is a problem, okay, it's a challenge. The maritime industry gets forgotten, and young people need to know of it, know of the opportunities which are there, and they are there probably in more abundance today than they were before, but in a very different form to what they were before. And 2016, we could use that today, couldn't we? Challenges and opportunities in an uncertain world, and it's certainly an uncertain world at the moment in so many different ways. And I do feel sorry sometimes for those in charge of organisations and companies who are thinking of making investment decisions, which are going to be multi-years in length, and trying to get the actual answers right to ensure that they get returns on what they're doing, and their shareholders and their persons benefit from it. Last year we had, 2019, we had empowering women in the maritime community. The IMO and all shipping industries are very much aware that we have got an sourced labour market in the sense of women at sea. And we're surprised a little bit to learn at our conference that it's only about 1.5% of all persons at sea are in fact female in the merchant service. And yet you go to the Royal Navy, the captain of the Dartmouth was telling us that they are now up to 20% of their entrants are in fact female. All the training establishments in the Royal Navy today are led by captains, female captains, which is quite interesting. So there is this sort of move forward. We're very slow. We're in different organisations, and it's much more complex. It's much easier when you're in a single organisation, particularly a pyramid-style organisation like the Royal Navy, to actually encourage women into that sort of organisation than it is into the diverse and separate sort of organisations we tend to be. Last 2020, okay, we cancelled our meeting due to COVID. That was because we were all in lockdown, but we came out of lockdown, in fact, in 2021, and we sort of celebrated what seafarers were doing, and in fact, the problems they'd had by looking at under the title Seafarers at the Core of Shipping's Future. So that's okay, the way the system has worked. Now, the gentleman pictured here is a chap called Mr. Keetak Lim. We probably don't know him, we probably never met him, but he's the Secretary General of the International Maritime Organization, which is that organization which sets, in fact, the policies and sets the conventions for the world in terms of maritime. Hugely interesting job and a really responsible one. I can say that, in fact, his predecessor did come down to Plymouth not so many years ago to look at our new marine building at Sutton Harbour. I can also say that, in fact, one of our former students actually was, in fact, the Deputy Secretary General of the IMO until he retired. So we have some links there, even with Plymouth, and these persons who, in fact, are in such important jobs. I'm told if I press the button, I'm frightened of pressing buttons. I don't like doing it because I can get into a mess. Sorry?
Just click it.
Just click it. Which one do I just click? This one?
On the left. Try that one. Left arrow. No, where it says click the link. No, click the link.
Click the link.
You're trying to play a video, Paul?
Yes, I was going to, yeah.
Click YouTube.
The World Maritime Day, the underlined
Try
one.
that.
No.
Oh, yeah.
Works. There it is.
Oh, well, we'll leave it at that.
In the world, the most pressing ocean and environmental challenges are climate change, marine litter, and preserving biodiversity. And this year's World Maritime theme has been chosen to highlight initiatives intended to address them. Our theme for 2022 is New Technologies for Greener Shipping. It provides an opportunity to promote innovation, research and development, and technology cooperation, and to showcase solutions for decarbonization and more environmentally friendly shipping. These ambitions will benefit everyone. No one will be left behind. It's not only a theme, it marks a pathway to help implement the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which set out 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, especially SDG 13 on climate change, SDG 14 on sustainable use of the ocean, seas, and marine resources, and SDG 9 on industry, innovation, and infrastructure. But above all, it is about partnerships and inclusive technological solutions reflecting SDG 17, which highlights importance of partnerships and implementation to achieve all the goals. New technologies for greener shipping opens up a larger conversation about the shipping's direction and how technologies can be harnessed for a more sustainable future. It also provides an incentive to further examine how digitalization and automation can support the shipping. But technological solutions for cleaner, safer, more sustainable shipping must also benefit people. They must consider their impact on seafarers and other marine personnel, including the need for training. So I'm pleased that I am announcing this year's theme to coincide with the first celebration of the International Day for Women in Maritime on 18th May, and to mark this joint landmark. IMO will generate opportunities for discussion on women in decision-making and on skill development in the maritime industry. This will support the just and equitable transition to decarbonization of international shipping and the key role for women in leading change, particularly in the production and uptake of low-carbon marine fuels and shipboard technologies. Throughout this year, IMO will also highlight green shipping solutions across the industry and to provide a platform for sharing knowledge and best practices. IMO will also foster a dialogue on innovation and technology needs for greener shipping, sharing knowledge at the global level. To this end, IMO will provide updates on initiatives being trialed and piloted by the IMO established Maritime Technology Cooperation Centers, or MTCCs, and the Green Voyage 2050 Decarbonization Project and the Blue Solutions Project. These will demonstrate new maritime decarbonization technologies and build on our next-gen decarbonization initiative, which links efforts of existing IMO projects, MTCC, and various R&D centers to enhance knowledge sharing at the global level. We will also organize another global forum to address technology and its deployment in the maritime sector, with a specific emphasis on needs of developing countries, especially least developed countries and small island developing states. In addition, we will be hosting the second IMO Symposium on alternative low carbon and zero carbon fuels, which will focus both on opportunities in renewable fuel production for the shipping industry in developing countries, and on supporting technology cooperation initiatives to support their transition toward decarbonization. Another global project will showcase solutions for biofouling management to protect biodiversity and help reduce emissions, while a further initiative will tackle marine plastic pollution. All of these projects highlight the need for all stakeholders across the maritime sector to work together and find a solution. And I know that we can all do this. During the year, we will invite all of you to discuss and showcase and highlight inclusive solutions for the future of shipping. And we will provide information on how to share your technology stories in due course. I'm excited about the possibility that this year's theme, New Technologies for Greener Shipping, brings to a global conversation on the future of our planet. And I look forward to hearing from you as well. Let us continue and enhance our conversation for a greener, more equitable, and a more sustainable maritime future.
Right, that's a set of very general ideas. And if I stop share there, I'll stop.
No. You just close that.
Yeah, just come to the top.
Close YouTube.
Which one do I go there? This one here.
Yeah, that's that. No, that one's that one.
And the other one.
Oh, right. Well, thank you for that. So, yes, so his interest there is climate change, which of course is all about the business of reducing carbon. Maritime litter, which of course is much of an issue which Plymouth is dealing with, and preserving biodiversity, again, an issue which Plymouth itself deals with. I won't read any further of those because he's actually stated them, but we'll move on to the next slide of my introduction. And just a few words about Plymouth. Plymouth as a city, as you know, is set about creating a global centre of excellence for testing, development and manufacturing of autonomy, digital and clean ocean technologies for the rapidly growing global ocean economy. And this has got the Oceans Futures project is involved with that. This is a public-private partnership, and some of the big names are mentioned there, like Babcock Tails, MSUBs, and 30 other organisations who are key players. The UK largest cluster of marine researchers, such as the Plymouth Marine Laboratories and the MBA, and as well as University of Plymouth, are also involved in this Oceans Futures, as well as the autonomous seas technologies, which is a cluster down at Turnchapel. They are set into Plymouth Smart Sound, which provides a test bed, easy access to little deep sea oceans, which is in fact more convenient than any other port in the UK, so we can get out into deep water very quickly from Plymouth. So Plymouth stands as a really good place in terms of its development, if you like, for bringing forth the sustainable economies which are desired. So I'm going to stop there. I'm now going to go back and invite on my list. It's Richard to speak to us on new technologies for greener shipping. So Richard, let's
I'll see what we can do on that one. And there we go.
It's as easy as that, was it?
Yeah, full screen. That's okay. And we'll do.
When you know how.
I spent 2 years of COVID doing this in the bedroom. Yeah, hang on a minute. I'll just do the share screen. And we go, and there we go. There we go, brilliant.
Well, so I'm going to leave over to Richard now to talk on new technologies for greener shipping. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Richard Pemberton. I work up at the university. I'm one of the lecturers up there in marine design. Before coming to the university, I worked out in industry. I was working in yacht design and sort of as a design consultant at the Walton unit at Southampton University as well. And the bulk of my research at the moment is regarding, well, sort of two strands really that both link up into greener shipping. There's the marine autonomy side, we're heavily involved in that at the university, and also clean propulsion. And so I'll give a little bit of talk about the overall picture of where it is. Just as I see it, probably a lot of what I say we'll see down the line in 20 years or so will be wrong tonight, but that's probably going to be the same for many people. So it's just giving a bit of an overview as things stand at the minute. So one of the things that the net zero discussion is dominated by is the view that pretty much all vessels currently have a diesel engine which needs to be replaced. And there's this sort of question that always comes from companies who are talking about the new technologies that are available is, well, tell us what technology to go with, that it's going to be a one technology replacement. And really, I think neither of those two things are correct. I'll give a little bit of an example as to why. And we start off with looking at history, really, because it's always a good way of seeing what's going to come in the future. Just look at what's happened in the past, and trends can be the same. And the things that we see is that technology always takes a little bit of time to progress. It always takes a time for one technology to become dominant. There's always a period where there's overlaps. You had things starting off with the first paddle steamer going in about 1783. But you had about 30, 40 years before the first Atlantic crossing was done predominantly with steam. They were doing it with steam, but they had the sails up as well. 1839, the first electric boats are out there. So much as people say they're all new, well, before the diesel engine was about, there were a lot of battery boats around in the end of the 1800s, early 1900s. And yeah, you could almost call that period between 1880 and 1920 a golden age of electric vessels. Diesel's first patent came out in 1892. He struggled in terms of business. I think it was around 1912, 1914 or something like that he committed suicide jumping off a cross-channel ferry. But it was about around that time that the first ocean-going diesel ship was running. But we really didn't see sort of diesel and internal combustion eating into those the coal or the oil-fired steam until really coming up to the sort of the 1940 period, where the Second World War led to there being a technology shift. All of the old boats were sunk, well, not all of them, but large amounts of shipping was sunk. And so when people came to replace, they were going to replace with the newer technology. But it's still coming from a small port in Cornwall. Friends, parents used to talk about in the 1930s, still being able to see sail trading ships leaving from Par, which was a China clay port. And certainly up until the 1950s, if you went down to South America, you'd probably be doing it by sail because there wasn't sufficient diesel infrastructure down there to be able to pick up the fuel. So those sorts of things we've seen before, and we're going to see recurring things again in whatever technology comes forward. And the point as well that we talk about with diesel being the only propulsion means, although we're in really small numbers, there are vessels out there with steam turbines. They may be nuclear, they may be running LNG, but it's there. And there's also vessels out there with hydrogen fuel cells. I studied my final year as an undergraduate in Germany, and we had a lecturer on submarines there. All of the German submarines for many years being hydrogen fuel cell powered. Now, because they couldn't go to nuclear for their submarines due to the Second World War treaties and the like. So yes, they're small percentages, but fundamentally, as society, as engineers and designers, people have always chosen the most appropriate technology when it's available. And I think that's one of the things that when we go forward, that's not going to change. We're still going to choose the most appropriate technology, and that's going to mean that we aren't going to have this one replacement takes all option that people are looking for. So the next sort of question is, well, where do we want to go? There's a range of different options out there, and I tried to pick the most relevant pictures where I could for hydrogen, batteries, ammonia, and this was about as good as synthetic fuels could get. They're all in various states of development, and I think the important thing to say about all of them is it's very easy to have like a preconception about what the performance for the latest stage of batteries is. But it's a massively moving playing field with all of these technologies. So I'll take batteries as an example. The latest Tesla, rather than having a 400-mile range that the current one has, it's going to have a 600-mile range. And that's just using the lithium technologies that they've got. There's aluminium batteries that are being looked at, far better for recycling. Problems with stability, they're not there yet, but they are at a stage of development, and that's going forward, and should be able to get more cycles out of them, cheaper material. You don't have the issue that you have politically with cobalt being used in lithium batteries, and cobalt's pretty much coming from Democratic Republic of Congo, and so there's issues with that. So all of these technologies, they're all developing. They all have different cost per kilowatt hour values, and I think the important word there is they've all got different trajectories as well, because some of them will be able to level off in the price or reduce, and none of them are diesel. And the question I sort of pick out is do we have to pick one? Because I think depending on our vessel type, there could be a different thing. There is a common problem though, and I think with all of them, there's a common lack of infrastructure. And I think that's a recurring theme you see, and it's what's been seen in the past, and that's what sort of halts the progression of the technology. So I think that's important with all of them to address that. And they've all got their individual problems. And certain people will proclaim a lot about the synthetic fuels, but if you're not burning them at the right temperatures, then you're creating some pretty nasty stuff with that. If you also look at where you're going to get those synthetic fuels from, I mean, whether we can afford the land mass to grow corn or the like for it, you know, there's some big questions about that, and they're yet to be resolved. And particularly when we come to the next slide, which sort of focuses a little bit more on, it's the one after this, on ammonia, we'll talk about some of the problems there. The fundamental problem with all of them was that diesels were at this great point in terms of energy density, in that, you know, there's just this right amount of carbon molecules, carbon atoms and hydrogen atoms, that it's when you break them up under combustion, you're able to release an awful lot of energy that when you're talking about compressed hydrogen or even ammonia, you're just not getting that same level of energy out. And that's the fundamental problem that we've got. We didn't realize what we were using was so good. So and if you come down here into the battery territory, you're in an even worse sort of situation. One of the things to remember with all of this, and I think going forward, is that change in energy density is something we're going to have to see as a knock-on effect in ship designs, and ship designs going forward are going to have to allocate more space, both be it for systems and for whatever energy it is that powers them. And this is I started off by saying that some of what are going to be was going to be wrong, and what better to be wrong than a government prediction. But this is the current prediction. It's out in a consultancy document to input into the revision of the Clean Maritime Plan, and it's the research that's been done for the estimated proportion of energy demand for UK domestic maritime vessels met by alternative low or zero emission fuels between 2050 and 2020. And I think the dot that you can't see on the graph, that's a battery one. So is it that one? Sorry, I'm trying to remember. I'll just try and move the window a bit so we can see it. There you go, electricity. So as you can see, the big chunk of it is being looked to be met by ammonia. Why ammonia? Well, Wärtsilä has already proven that they've got an engine concept which can run on a blend of up to 70% ammonia, and they reckon that they're going to have a concept engine running on pure ammonia by 2023. You've also got one of the benefits of ammonia that you can put it through the hydrogen fuel cells. If you put it through a splitting apparatus first, you can get the hydrogen off it, and the nitrogen comes away, and you put the hydrogen into a hydrogen fuel cell, and you get electricity straight into your motor there. The reason why would you do that and not go straight to hydrogen? With having the nitrogen molecule in there, it packs up a lot better. You're able to get a better energy storage with being in ammonia. So they're all the reasons why the government thinks it'd be great and it'll be really good. But there are some massive questions regarding ammonia. And when you talk to anyone, well, not anyone, a lot of people in the industry are just sitting there going, yeah, when it comes up. From the environmental point of view, for people on board, the crewing, the smell, the corrosion of it, particularly in regard to systems. And it's all right making these predictions for brand new engines that are in a lab and brand new systems in it. But when you're looking 20 years down the line, what's the state of that going to be? How's it being maintained? Are you getting a potential environmental disaster just sort of waiting to happen? So there's a lot of unanswered questions about ammonia, and I personally think that's kind of whilst it's a in certain ways a more straightforward technology to introduce, it's certainly a concerning jump to go. One of the things that I missed off on the slide in terms of technology, I hadn't included nuclear in it. It was really interesting. I gave a talk like this at a conference called UK Nest, which was a naval engineering supply training conference. And one of the admirals from the Navy there was asked by a guy from Rolls-Royce, you know, are you considering nuclear in the surface ships? And he was pretty much saying no. He didn't say yes, but it's not high on their agenda. And so my reading of that scenario was, if the Navy as an operator who already operate in a nuclear fleet aren't really looking at it for their nuclear for the surface ships, the likelihood of it coming into merchant surface ships is probably pretty low, despite the fact that, you know, there are a lot of potential benefits. I think if the Navy won't tolerate that risk, that's certainly an interesting point for me. Or they were concerned that they wouldn't be able to get into a lot of ports by doing that. Was the reason for that? So one of the things which I think is really important, and that's probably going to link in well with Adrian coming later, is I think it's really important that we look at what we've already spent. You know, we're lots of the reviews to be able to reduce the amount of emissions of carbon dioxide going out, start looking at these sort of step changes in technology that we've already talked about. But we've got to do something now, and we've got to reduce the amount of the ice cap that's melted, and we've also melted a whole load of ice cap in producing things already. So getting the usage out of what we've created, rather than putting an additional burden going straight over to a new technology, is quite important. One of the things that we're quite interested to start researching, which Bob Allen, many of you know, he sort of started that work, and he's keen to get me and one of our chemists doing a bit more on it, was looking at treatment of exhausts. In the case of, I think it was from Singapore, a tanker, the Coral Sea, had exhaust treated with alkaline water. and they got very impressive results in terms of what sulfur they removed, what NOx they removed, and what carbon dioxide they removed. Now, the problems relating to that are what's the pH of the water that you end up with at the end. So, you know, if you're ending up with something that's highly acidic and putting it back in the ocean, well, that's something you can't do. So you've got to find those sort of sweet spots of can you treat it? Can you reduce what's going out? But can you have something that is not going to change the pH of the seawater where you are? And also, how efficiently can you produce that alkaline water? And that's something that we're looking to do some more research on and look into. And one of the points that we're talking about is, and this is like a real personal view really, is no one really knows which of these technologies are going to develop and who's going to gain what sort of share. But we have seen this issue of infrastructure being an issue regardless of which ones lose share. And my feeling is that because we're starting from almost zero, investing in all suitable infrastructures probably makes sense. Because compared to where you're going to end up, it's going to be a fairly small amount of investment at this stage. And there probably will be a sector of the market that will use the amount that you're talking about investing in. So I think we're at a stage where we can back all horses. One of the projects we were involved with for Plymouth University was the Marine E-Charging Living Lab, which is basically a network of electric charging points about the harbour. That was a collaboration between us, Plymouth City Council, Princess, and the charging providers, Aqua Superpower. And certainly for the smaller end of the market, the sort of 20, 30 foot vessels, that sort of thing, it's quite feasible for sort of workboats and the like to be running on electric batteries. It's more to do with the battery charging control that will allow them to utilize these fast chargers. But it's technically possible. The big problem is cost of doing it, pretty simply. The battery packs and the engineering required around them, it's not commonplace. But each year with the Green Tech Boat Show that we've had in Plymouth, you're getting more people who are providing solutions to that. Is in the same way as cars. It was only really Tesla a few years ago. Now there's a lot of manufacturers. It's just going to go up, and the marine market benefits from that because the E-Voyager boat that we were involved with, that's batteries had been previously in a Nissan Leaf, and they just not energy density levels required for that, where we can settle for something a bit less with a marine setup. So we've been using that. Further developments we're looking to do is how we can go to slightly more off-grid locations. The other thing as well, I think we really need to look at the requirements of what we're doing. Do we always need to do things the way we're doing it? Can we change speeds? If we change speeds, there's potential to save a lot of emissions just through that. And can autonomy be applied? We're big into autonomy at the small scale here, looking at, and we've made our own carbon reductions using the autonomous vessel when we do surveys. It's a lot less fuel burn on that, and we can probably convert that quite easily to lithium ion. You've got companies like Ocean Infinity here. They're looking at doing sort of 70-meter ships as autonomous vessels. There's pros and cons to that. There's certainly a lot of legislative issues that are being addressed at the moment with that. But one of the things is the crew on an autonomous vessel, i.e. none, can put up with ammonia a lot more than the crew of another vessel, so you're not going to get a complaint about the smell. All of this has to be done in conjunction with doing life cycle assessments. There's no point just looking and saying, well, we'll do that, we'll have less emissions. You've got to look at the whole picture. What's it going to be at the end of life? Is it going to cause another impact? And you've got to have that holistic approach. We work with Princess Yachts on doing that. It's something that I think is just going to be embedded into pretty much all engineering going forward, and is really important. We're certainly trying to teach our students to be doing that. And the key aim we just don't want to melt any more of the ice cap. Yeah, I'll leave maybe questions to the end, Paul, if you like, because you have that session then, or quite happy to take them now, whatever you prefer. So.
What do you want to relation to? Sorry?
Yeah, that's all right. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very interesting and authoritative talk, and I now call upon Adrian now to.
Do you want? I was going to say,
Adrian to carry on in the same vein, which is.
Oh, God. Sorry, my there's this one here, isn't it? Which one was your one? Eco Pro. Yeah. There you go. And cut that bit off. Oh yeah, no, it will come in a minute. There you go. There you go. And just the arrow. It's just that one.
Adrian comes from ABP Marine Consultancy, and he's speaking in association with Lotus Eco Pro. We look forward to hearing what you have to say.
All right, thank you, Paul. Well, thanks for Richard for inviting us. We don't know who we are. We're a company, my name's Adrian Bartlett. We're a company based up in Heathfield. We're a Southwest company with, I would probably say 90% of Southwest products put in our system together. So we work very locally with independent suppliers of our system, the Eco Pro. We've been, well, Kirsten's one of the owners. Jason's on a boat in Victoria Wharf at the moment. But it's been 10 years in development with Kirsten and Jason messing around with hydrogen. And I've been with Eco-Motors now, get to January next year for 3 years from my fishing background and my marine background. Kirsten and Jason a Navy background. And as you can see, we're starting to get recognised for our system, basically, and we'll go into the system a little bit more. You know, we were shortlisted for the British Farming Awards because we work in the agriculture industry on tractors now, bringing the carbon footprint down. Business Product Innovation Award finalist. This year we won the Product of the Year for the Fishing News Awards because we work in the fishing industry with our so which was a good moment to have. We've had a cut of funding from Innovate, but basically apart from that funding, it's come out of our own pockets. We beg, borrow and steal to get this technology to, as what Richard was saying, to stop the ice caps mounting. And all we're trying to do is reduce emissions, and that's our kind of headline. But there is byproducts and good byproducts by using our system. Okay, and it's like Richard was saying, it's all about what's not coming out of the exhaust. So I think that's the aim of reducing emissions in the maritime industry or any other industry. So there's a system. At the moment, with the systems that we've got, we've saved 824 tonnes at the moment. We've got calculators and we can calculate our systems working. It's a standalone painting technology. I know Roger's sat here now, and the first call that we made was to the fact state, the MCA. Any technologies, if we don't satisfy the MCA's criteria, you ain't going to get very far anyway. But under the MCA's guidance, you know, they guided us through full type approval with RENA, which we had last year, and we're just finishing now with DMV. So, you know, once you get one class society behind you, but we still got to work with the MCA, and we're still working with the MCA up until last week to satisfy their safety needs, which now our class society RENA has taken over surveys of the system. But what it actually does is we can reduce carbon dioxide and noxide gases. We burn fuel more efficiency. So there's two ways we can save on emissions, but if the skippers and the cars and the trucks understand they can come back on the throttle a little bit, we can make them go further, or we can reduce the fuel usage on the vessel. Fuel is a very difficult one to to calculate. You see, it's like everybody, how do you afford the system? But when Kirsten prices out a system like that, we will give them a three-year payback time. Some boats, if they use more fuel and they save more, they can pay it back quite quickly. And fortunate enough, in the fishing industry, under the MMO and DEFRA and fast funding, we can get 50% towards the costs. So we're getting inundated by fishing boats because 50% is already done, and that's for the next 3 or 4 years. We're going into a little bit more. Another massive one. We're giving the engine a chance to be a lot cleaner and less engine wear. And you'll see some of the oldest boats that we've been on coming up 3 years now, and they're getting cleaner and they're avoiding overhauls, they're avoiding maintenance, which is another, every time you do an oil change on an average engine, you're kissing £2.5 by. And some of our engine have gone from a 500-hour oil change to 750 to 1,000 hours now between oil changes, because there's no carbon buildup of how the system operates. Then that comes to less emitting out the exhaust as a pollution. And then that gives us that carbon footprint, and that's just a standard cell. That one was at the Green Tech boat show, if you didn't see that one. And now that is on a boat now in Brixton. That's on a beamer, which is doing phenomenally well. Our system can be installed on any engine. We're in Victoria Wharf. We're on their low loaders. So walking towards your free port, your operators are already using our system to reduce their emissions down. So they've been very good to us at Victoria Wharf. We was talking about plastics and pollutions, and that's a boat called the St Mungo. That is up in Scotland in Glasgow City Council boat, and that was put on, and our system's still on there now, and that was put there for COP26, and that goes up and down taking pollutants out of the Clyde. And that's the crowd is called Waterwitch, based in Liverpool, and they're promoting our systems. And they also do electric vessels now. There's one around in Albert, the Albert Docks in Liverpool now is an electric Waterwitch. We've mentioned tractors. We're heavily involved. The difference with the tractor side of everything, they're accepting the technology more than the marine side of it at the moment, because there's more pressure. It seems to be more pressure on producing food on land than there is the maritime sector. We're still a little bit behind. It's the first vessel we had it on. That's the Emma Jane 90-metre crabber, and then we went into the CTV world. That's a tidal transit boat, a boat called the Giffy Petra. So if it combusts, even Glasgow City Council, we had it on their road mowers. Okay, if it combusts, we can deal with it. Okay, and this is just a basic how our system works. So all we're doing through electrolysis is producing hydrogen, and we store hydrogen in water. There's no infrastructure. The only infrastructure we need is to get to the actual vessel with our van. We put a full complete survey in. The survey gets signed off by us and the owners. It's obviously working through the MCA. There's criteria for putting equipment on vessels, and hopefully now we've met all the criteria. It's taken a couple of years, but I think we're finally there now. And then it just goes straight into the air filter, gets pulled in by the negative pressure, and then it's starting to break the carbon chain down. By the time it hits the combustion chamber, it's doing a complete burn of diesel. Diesel is going to be around for a long time, but what we need to do with, and every time Kirsten and Jason was up in Portsmouth talking to the equivalent in Portsmouth today, we need to start looking at what we've got now to start working towards an end goal. 2050 seems a long way ahead, but it's 27 years away. Is people's mindsets thinking, should we change in 2050 or do we change now? And I think we've got to do it now, really. In our system is self-contained. It sits in the engine room. The only requirements for the vessel owners to do is to check the water. It was brought up through our conversations. This is what 1 ton equivalates to. But as we was working through our system, we come onto the boats in a little bit more detail in a minute, is how do we take control of our system, or we remotely monitor it? We can get our phones out now. We can go anywhere in the world when we start moving in the world. We can go into each individual ship and we can understand what hydrogen, and our hydrogen works in harmony with the engine. So if you're towing or you're steaming, the hydrogen is produced more. If you're idling, it produces less. There's a problem with hydrogen. If you put too much in too quick, you're overpowering that engine, you're overpowering the NOxes in your CO2. And it's a sweet spot for that carbon chain to break down to do that total combustion. And that's what's taken 10 years to figure out. Going back to the Emma Jane, this is a C18 cap. It's one of the MCA's followed this boat now for 3 years, coming up 2.5 years. We had Cat independent engineers. Now Caterpillar, the other problem that is within our industry is the engine manufacturers. Basically, they're still working on an archaic NOx code, really, and that needs to be, I think the NOx code needs to be reported. There was an amendment in 2012, but what it's not allowing new technologies to come into the marine industry sensibly. It's hard work to work next to that top NOx technical code. And as you're aware, we're tier 3 English Channel, tier 3 North Sea. Now the Danish, on January the 1st next year, certain banks, even if you're steaming through them or you're fishing on them or whatever, you've got to be tier 3 regulated or tier 3 engines, and it's very difficult to get there. We can get there through our system. But when the engine manufacturers, the engine's the throwaway commodity. It's the support for the oil servicing, the top end overhauls. And we had a very uncomfortable meeting at the Work Tech Boat Show with Top Cat boys. We enterscope that engine at 10,000 hours, 20,000 hours now, and 30,000 hours, and that engine is cleaner now than it was at 10,000 hours. But a top end overall for that engine is £45,000. This year would have been £60,000. Okay, so that owner of that vessel's got to spend out 60,000 hours when it doesn't need it. And we back that up with all the oil samples. All our boats take oil samples now. When they come to the engineers don't need it, and that's through endoscoping and through testing. Now Caterpillar didn't quite like that, but when they was getting more angrier, they let slip. They put weakened valve springs in the engines to force overhauls. Okay, well that's not fair on the environment, and that's certainly not fair for the engines. And unfortunately, the MCA's got no control, unfortunately, over that engine. Everything connected to it they have. So the engine manufacturers have got to change tack to how the world goes greener. VW's con the world, and maybe the bigger engine companies are as well. And that's the borescope. You can still see the piston marks. That's the top of the piston with the diamond, and that was 31,000 hours. So and we're just about to, hopefully in the next 4 or 5 weeks, go on a boat that's up 160,000 hours. So it can be on a 1,000 hour, you know. So, and then again, it's like, is a technology in a company like Ecomotus, we can only get this data for being in real time. You know, this boat's coming up nearly 3 years now. Well, that can't lie. We're approved by RENA. The first call I made was to the MCA, and they guided us and showed us what we needed to do. I put out 10 emails to all the class societies. The only one that come back was RENA. The rest was kind of, well, what are you trying to achieve? And to be fair, RENA is absolutely brilliant. They put us in AIP quite quickly, and then it was 9-10 months to work through FEMA, and including with the MCA, because obviously it doesn't make a difference. It's got to be safe. You know, that's the bottom line. But they give us our type approval, okay, and it's standalone, meaning we don't need engine manufacturers' requirements to go aboard that vessel. It's down to the owners. If the engine's in warranty, they only put a year's warranty on them anyway, so we go on after that. So with RENA and the MCA, they're working nicely. We've had not a difficult few weeks, but we've got through that, and it's just understandable. So vessel owners through the MCA, yeah, again, it was new technology. How do we know the system's safe or it meets requirements? So through the MCA, they come up with this 1261 for an exemption. There was a bit more difficulties on it, but hopefully we're through that now. So when it goes on any vessel now in the UK, we've had to do a bit more paperwork, which has just come to, you know, a couple of days ago. So this presentation is about 10 days out now. Each vessel will get an MCA form, but it'll be signed off by RENA. So RENA will come aboard the vessel, they do the survey, check the system, all the forms then go to the local MCA offices. That'll get issued to the boat, and that then will cover you for future surveys. And it just covers you. Oh, if an MCA goes aboard, oh, what's that? Oh, this is a pack in the wheelhouse about the surveys, the product, the safety, the manuals, the certification. Will cover the Eco Pro, you know, on anything under the MCA flag. In which I know Roger's here, but we're really proud of that. You know, but one of the questions that came up from the MCA, how do we know it's working? So we thought, right, we've got to look at this. So we shut ourselves away. We put ourselves back into our R&D workshop. We've got a very astute couple of electronic engineers, both Southwest, well, one North Devon, but both Southwest people. And so we need to read what's happening with our system, of our electronics. 4 weeks later, we come up with this remote system. So we can dial in. This is just a snapshot, but we can take temperatures of, we can put any parameters in on our electronics of that engine room. We read external temperatures, internal temperatures. How we read the system is we put a microphone, a knock sensor on the engine, and it tells where the engine is. We convert that through our electronics to produce hydrogen. But what we've just achieved today, funny enough, news on the block, is we're doing it off of flow meters now. So we can do it a little bit more accurately. The knock is sometimes quite difficult to dissect, but is easier with a flow meter. So it's probably 4 or 5 months to develop it a little bit further, but we can dial in just to see how that system's operating. The boat owners can have a dashboard, but they can't adjust it. But if we think if a boat needs a little bit more, we can go in there and we can just up the amperages by half an amp. We don't need much adjustment to find that sweet spot, and then it's aiding that burn a little bit more. And that's just absolutely brilliant. You know, we can just type it in now, type up, and go to the Barents Sea, or we can go to Scotland, or go wherever, and we can just monitor it. And that's coming into us on every second or 3 seconds. We had a complaint by one boat owner because it was drawing too much data from them, so we slowed the data down. Okay, so we can monitor every system that goes on the vessel, and that's another unique aspect of the Eco Pro. Just a few more with the boats. I know we're a little bit pushed for time. That's the, I think that's got to be the cleanest fishing boat in the UK at the moment, because not only we do the main engine, we do the auxiliary engines as well. So she's running totally with the aid of the Eco Pro on 2, and basically 3 electronics. So the main engines run off of 4 cells. So basically we're producing hydrogen in there out of water, and it's 1,220 litres of hydrogen, pure 1 litre. And that's the best way to secure hydrogen. Goes through a moisture catcher, and then just gets plumbed into the air filter securely. And then the engine starts, it pulls, engine stops, the system goes to sleep. So yeah, so that's one of the oldest boats that is had our system on, and she was built in '89. That's our emissions. When we started off, you can see the reductions on idle and on revs, on ppm and CO2. And then, you know, a few months later, that's what we've reduced the back. So there's the percentage changes on that boat. Right, when it comes to testing boats emissions, it's very difficult. So we've got 2 identical Kane 5-gas analyzers, and we use both of them. They go back every 6 months to get calibrated. Because if you went to emission test a boat now, there's no system out there apart from one in America. You can put in line ship side in ship engine rooms, permanent ones, but there's only one, but it's about £18,000. But there's no way of really judging it. We know certain companies with scrubbers are only turning them on when they need to be monitoring, they're turning them off. But, you know, with our system, it's constant, okay? So that is the emissions, and we've saved so far 14 to 22 tons. That's if she's creating 10% fuel savings or 15%. We always say 5% is achievable, but we've had one beamer at 29% fuel savings, so 4,000 litres in its first week. So it depends how it gets used, but we don't talk about the fuel savings because it's like you promise something or you say something, they don't hit it, they're disappointed, but they're forgetting about the big thing, about the maintenance and about the emissions. Okay, and then that's that guarantee.
But you're here to talk about emissions, but that is the big selling point, really.
In a way, it is, but we try not to talk about it too much, really. But the byproduct of us burning and doing a complete combustion is fuel. But you can either keep it at the same revs and push the hull and not get anywhere, but get 20% further, or you just come back. When we get to the Kitty Petra, we brought her back now from service speed was always 85%. We brought her down to 83%, 82%. She's still hitting service speed. And then she's starting to make some savings. We can explain that with the Barents Sea, when Sean's on watch, he's more economical than Mark. And we can tell when Mark's on watch within 10 minutes. So as he puts that in, Roger, we know he's, you know, but we can only advise on that. So that's what she can say, you know, but, you know, fishermen are fishermen, aren't they? But yeah, again, you just got to have an understanding master, skipper or mate about the system. Okay, Kitty Petra, she's the second longest serving boat with our system on. She's got 2 B12 mans. They're running 1400 horsepower, and she's the greenest CCEV boat out there operating in real time now. 2 systems, independently run, independent electronics. The port engine, I'll wind it up in a minute. The port engine runs the whole boat, so it's heavier on fuel. And when I took that boat from Grimsby to Liverpool, the engine started off on, the port engine was 220 litres an hour. The starboard is about 196. In the end, I got the port engine down to 167 litres an hour, keeping the same service speed, keeping those props in balance. And that's got a Marfley system on there. And the port prop, before we plumbed in both engines, was running at 105% efficiency, where the starboard engine was down to probably about 92. So, you know, so that was a brilliant comparison with the Kitty Petra. And that's her figures. And that's what we've reduced her down 72 and 73% from the initial start. Yeah, again, figures, we can't lie. We try to back everything up. We do as best we can. Right, the pricing, if you use it sensibly, you know, when we get a quote come in, you know, Kirsten will work on 10, 15, 20%. But that's, you know, so if they're using it on 12 hours or 14 hours or 12 hours, this is some of the fuel savings they can make. And that's the biggest pluses. But you've got to get that master, skipper, mate, captain to understand that, you know. And that's just a little bit about the St Mungo. You know, we're pretty proud to go on there. The skipper is really good to us, funny enough, because he found out through COP26 where all the news rooms were, and he kept going up and down. So we've got a great big sticker on the side there, look, Eco Motors making Glasgow green. And funny enough, was the Glasgow, they were looking for us to go on 1,000 vehicles as well, but finances at the moment. So we were on there, dust trucks and Arctics and stuff like that. And that's what we've saved her. Look. She's an 18-year-old straight sick Perkins, you know. Never had any work done to her, so we're bringing her down nicely. Risks and responses. You know, we've had to work seriously hard, new technology with all people involved. You know, when you mention hydrogen and mention boats, automatically they think about fire. The LEL is 4%. We've just done a calculation for DMB. If we wanted to fill a 66 room up with hydrogen, we've got to run for 21 days to try to even get to 4% LEL, and we're running at 0.004%. With minuscule amount of hydrogen. You don't need a lot to achieve masses with hydrogen. Okay, so it's been a very enjoyable, sometimes hair-pulling out experience, but I think we're finding that. So that's basically the EcoPro electrolyzer, and thank you very much for allowing us to be in your presence. It's been brilliant. Thank you.
What you said about Plymouth, Victoria Wharf fitted these, and it's going well, isn't it?
Yeah,
Going really well.
check them over all the time on the low loaders.
So we don't have the big electric stuff like the big ports do, but the big ports have got the big electric equipment. Have often got generators giving power to these big electric things. But Plymouth is the first dock in the country that's utilising these, and the equipment is burning clean. But I know it's not as important, but it's also as important with the fuel prices at the moment. They're saving 15–20% on their fuel costs. Loading.
I think they went to white April the 1st. I think they went to white, not commercial. Yeah, no, yeah, farmers. It was. Yeah, it went to white.
And we're all big ship people here, and in the future, the opportunity to upscale. I know you were chatting to my brother. I don't know where that is, but that would save him tens of millions of pounds a year in fuel, as well as being cleaner.
I'm still in discussion. His brother's running 50,000 ton bulkers, so we're still in discussions with that to really, you know, we can upsize or downsize. We know the optimum to produce the correct amount. So the system is how you get to that final combustion on how many modules you stick in.
And I always say as well that, like you said, 90% of the world travels by sea, and it's responsible for only 2% of the world's emissions. So it's already a very good ratio, but can do better. We would say this isn't the answer, because there is no answer yet, but it's a good stepping stone towards.
You know, so if we're transitional, how long's transitional? Tomorrow, 10 years, 15 years, but I don't know, we're talking out of Q&A now, but I mean, if we can get a phone call tomorrow from a boat, if the thing goes forward, we can be on the next day, it's green within 6 hours. It's starting, and then it's just getting greener and greener and greener, you know, and we're using diesel to get to that point. See what I mean?
What kind of water do you use? And is that something you can do on board? Or
oh yes, yeah, and you can buy it from.
We supply that. But an average boat's running on about 40p a week of water. So once it's there, the initial cost is on. It's a couple of 5 litres of water, and then we put it into the daily checks of the engine. There's an alarm system on there anyway with the reservoir. If we lose water, there's.
Oh, sorry.
No. I was just going to.
Another 100 we want to get out.
No, I just got.
I don't know how to come out of it.
What a question.
Well, there you go. There's, you know, Leo Hambro, tidal transit.
Yeah, sorry, so it's going.
What do you say we put on a
So it's worth just explaining why there is the exemption, and in many respects, there wouldn't need to be an exemption provided if the legislation wasn't so prescriptive. It's so. We've had the hydrocarbons around for so long, it's actually been written into the regulations that the fuel on board shall be diesel or fuel oil of some sort. And to take that out is really, really difficult legislatively. So we're having to exempt the fact that part of that propulsion fuel now is hydrogen, even though it's only, I didn't realise, 0.04%.
Yeah.
So, but that's why. So it's fair to say that the MCA is probably right at the learning curve of this as well. And, you know, having been in these discussions, I hope that it's going to become an awful lot easier than it's been. It's got to be. But, you know, we're also at the forefront of this. I believe Germany were also looking at this as well.
Well, no, what on our next move as
This
a company is we're meeting tier 3 requirements with our emissions, and this is where it's a little bit okay. You've only got to meet steam 1 engine, tier 1 engines by 80%, and we're well inside that. But for us to work through the NOx technical code, it's like Richard was saying, there's only one standalone SCR out there at the moment. The rest is one's on Volvo in there and one's somewhere else. And for us to issue an IAPP certificate against any engine, we've had to navigate ourselves through the NOx technical code. So RENA, using an independent company, RENA could do it, it's a conflict of interest. Secretech's come aboard. And the only one thing that's stopping us doing that is finances. It's not cheap. It's 300 hours work just to write the technical file against it. Then it's got to be submitted then back to RENA and then back to the MTA to do another exemption. And the NOx technical code, so you've got to do an 18-month cycle. So lucky enough, if we can get that far, the MTA said, well, if it's on there, you're starting your cycle. But when it comes to emissions in marine, we've had MIRA tested with vehicles. There's nowhere in the UK you can go and get an independent marine emission testing certificate. There's no university doing it at the moment. What Plymouth needs to do is they need to stick a dirty great big diesel room in there and open up the room to technologies to do that. There's nowhere to go. There's one engine in Rotterdam, and that's a man, again, and that's the problem. So when you're trying to verify stuff like this, there's no independent verification you can get, which is kind of ridiculous, really, when it's a
yeah, I mean, that's been one of our problems, is we don't really have the quick kit to help you. If you know what I mean, we're not in that place, and partly because we don't have, you know, you're not, when you don't have a local chain of people needing it regularly, it's a hard one to justify.
Yeah. So, you know, we're nearly, well, next week is 2 years permanently with Ecomotive, 10 years prior to that, and it's only time that's getting us recognised now, and proofs in the pudding, really. And I don't think technology should have that, or it should have the verification, you know, because we've obviously talked to Richard, we're talking to Humphrey, I think, to do their little dredging now, and it always comes down to finances. This is what we try to say, well, if you use it, it might be 4 years to pay back. But yeah, again, it's the only system that can go on that you will get payback. A scrubber in AdBlue is going to cost you all the time. You know, and if it takes 3 years or 4 years or 6 months, or there will be an end result of payback for the system to be aboard a vessel. And you know, it's cleaning it. You're saving money on your oil changes because you don't need to do them so regular. So, you know, there's only 4 or 5 of us in the company, so we've got to take little steps every time.
When you're talking about funding, I mean, this is sort of the areas that one would have thought the government, all its interests, would actually be able to give support to a small enterprise, such that you can actually get and do this and to develop it and to grow it.
We had Innovate funding, which was very helpful, and got us through quite a lot of our early testing, but it was such a nightmare of a process to go through. It scarred me, and I'm scared of going back again, to be honest, because you need someone almost to hold your hand and take you through that process. For a small company that is sort of hand to mouth really to start with, it's a very time-consuming and stressful process to try and go through. When all you're trying to do is make a difference, but it's
I saw another 60 million got revealed today, didn't it? For
yeah, I mean, we've been involved in a lot of the Clean Maritime demonstrator call bids, so there has been a lot of money come from the government, but when it comes to diesel engines, they're not set up for small companies. You know, the intention being, you know, a lot of diesel manufacturers have made a lot of profits over years. If they want to improve things, they should put it back in. So the companies who've had the money, we've worked a lot with the electric outboard company, Ecomotive Propulsion, up in the affair, and the companies that are going for the riskier technologies, as the government see it, is where they put the money. And I went to a meeting in London at the Chamber of Shipping, and there was a lady from Department for Transport, and they did say for these calls they had felt they had to go for the 2050 technologies, and like you had people there from Volvo come in, so sort of, well, why can't we get the money? And there is a thing like, you made a lot of money over the years, you've got to put back into it, sort of thing.
Well, folks, thank you very much, and I'm going to make my start now, and I hope I'll hit all the right buttons from now on. I always find these things confusing, but let's give it a go. The title I put forward was Safe Seas, Innovations in Marine Navigation. I think it's probably rather a sort of excessive title. There's a recognition, okay, that besides engine cleaning, the navigators can do something to again help maintain sustainability. A little bit like my colleague there, Richard from university, he went through history and to move forward. And of course, we too, in the navigation side, have a great deal of history to add to what we are and to where we're going. No doubt the marine navigation has evolved over time, as many of us will actually know. I was just going to focus on electronic aids to navigation, but of course they are relatively new. Of course, before that, we did use, in fact, the sun, the stars, the moon, and of course the terrestrial objects to take bearings and do navigation in that way. But that sort of era is, I think, coming to an end, particularly with the recent sort of pronouncements by the United Kingdom Hydrographic Office. So I was going to be very quick. The slides will go past quite quickly, I hope, just to illustrate the way we have moved. One of the issues, okay, at the beginning of all mariners' life is, in fact, the nearest land is not, in fact, either side of us, it's down below. And it was, in fact, the issue, okay, of echo sounding, which came into being in the 1930s, which in a way was, in fact, one of the progressive ways of moving into the electronic age. Because some would say, in fact, before that, of course, we had radio direction finding. And radio direction finding was initially sort of given its position as an aid to navigation after the Battle of Jutland, when in fact radio direction finding stations were in fact shoreside, and the ships were in fact tracked because they could do some triangulation. But of course, then the DF equipment, receiving equipment, went onto the ships, from which in fact the actual bearings could be taken. And that again goes back to the First World War. I think what we also see, in fact, in the development of navigation systems, is that in fact wartime is a real instigation and a real push to, in fact, the development. And that and other issues a bit later than the Second World War, issues like, in fact, technologies associated with space, but they too have got a warfaring element to them, and that pushes things forward. And the question is now, where are we at the present? Radar, okay, first was a wartime development, as many of us know. It was in fact there, which in fact the home front was sort of guarded by, in fact, the big aerials in the southeast of England, but eventually went ashore, and it went to sea rather, and it went to sea in terms of a cathode ray tube and a hand-rotated aerial to give, in fact, range and bearing. And so our radar systems, which we have today, have developed from these very coarse instruments of only, what, 60, 70 years ago, to the sophistication of what we have today. And how far they'll move ahead and what else they'll do in the future is really of sort of imagination, really. Other systems we have were, of course, hyperbolic systems which worked on phase difference or time difference measurement, and allowed us, in fact, to get a hyperbolic position line. And if we could get 2 from 3 stations, then we could get a position fix. Again, these were wartime events. The Decker system was, in fact, developed simply to ensure that the invading fleet into Normandy could, in fact, avoid the minefields laid by the Germans and actually land also at the right beaches, essentially at the right time. LORAN A stands for long range navigation. And again, that was to give an electronic sort of signal so that accuracy could be established. A lot of these systems also came into being because the British bombing campaigns into Germany were not very successful. Large numbers of bombs missed their targets. And therefore, okay, there was the development of systems from which Decca, from which Lorana A, in fact, became, in fact, the commercial activity. Radars have developed a lot, but this picture illustrates the late 40s sort of radar systems and an early radar display, which would only give, in fact, a picture based upon a rotating time base, which is relatively crude. Very good teaching aid, but of course, and unlike the sort of systems we have today, not in fact cleaned up. Radar, okay, was used basically as a navigational aid, but the persons on board the ship recognized, in fact, it could also be used as an anti-collision system, and that's what they used it for, but they didn't understand the issues of relative motion and true motion, and sometimes their sort of plotting activities were very wild, giving rise to, in fact, courses for people to understand that. I suppose it goes into the 1950s, the late 1950s, that things really started to move forward. And Sputnik, which was the Russian satellite put up in 1957, which is only some 50, 60 years ago, was really a start to sort of the development of our systems. It in fact gave way. The Sputnik system was looked at by the American scientists, and they tried to study it, which they did, and they found Doppler shift could give them opportunity to establish position. And so they put into place sort of polar orbiting satellites. And from the polar orbiting satellites, through measuring Doppler shift, we could in fact establish a position at a time. Sometimes with the first satellite navigation systems, we'd have to wait 12 hours between satellite fixes. But the transit satellite navigator ran, in fact, from 1967 to 1991, again, giving us accuracy and, in fact, a sort of a level which we hadn't had before. There were also, at the same time, to fill in the gaps between, in fact, the actual fixes by the orbiting satellites, Omega was, in fact, put into place. And this was, again, a phase difference measurement system, very similar to Decca, but in fact based on a very low frequency signal, and with only some 8 stations around the world, was able to produce, in fact, hyperbolic systems which allowed us to position fix. But the position fixing on Omega is suggested was about 4 miles. So not highly accurate, but certainly probably in some places better than nothing, when in fact cloud cover, for example, would in fact stop or preclude taking off sites. And so sort of ships could sail for many days without being able to fix a position. But if you could fix it within 4 miles, that would give some degree of support. Another issue which was also innovation in maritime and marine navigation is the calculator, the humble, unloved calculator. It's interesting that was only developed in 1963, well within our living memory. And it was in 1970, which is only 50 years ago, that the first battery hand-operated calculator was produced, and it weighed almost 2 pounds. By 1975, then the calculator had in fact become reduced in size and was used widely by students, except those from the Department of Transport doing their examinations. For it was in fact the Department of Transport which for many years would not allow handheld calculators to be used in examinations. The fear was the calculator would get lost and then nobody would be able to know where they were. Yeah, and I can recall that, so it's just sort of personally, because I remember having to take people through logarithms and all that sort of thing instead of a handheld calculator. The development of satellites, of course, was in fact a big system, and we seem to forget it these days. And I'm always amazed by people who run around with their telephones, I'll say we're latitude, longitude, or we're here and we're there, and they forget that in fact it's a very recent technology which in fact we are using. There are people who are cautious, about sort of over-dependence upon the GPS system. It was in fact conceived in 1973, but it wasn't in fact until the 1989 that the first satellite was in fact launched. That's going back now only 30 years. the 36 satellites are just about now in the configuration to give us the high accuracy fixes at any time of the day or night, wherever we are. So again, I remind people that that period of time, 30 odd years, is in fact only half my lifetime. And it's only half my lifetime that we've actually had this immediate system. Things move forward very quickly. And again, on the navigational side, the developments of ARPA, which was made mandatory, again, around the same time, 1990, replaced manual plotting for radar anti-collision work. And again, it was something which was really, in fact, an advanced system in its day. It may not look it there, but it was just, again, 30 years back. By the turn of the century, most of our sort of hyperbolic systems were being phased out. The Omega system was phased out in 1997, Decker system closed in 2000, and the Lorenzi continued until, in fact, February 2010. And then all but, in fact, the European stations were closed. And there was talk about, in fact, extending the European system as a terrestrial system in case of failure of, in fact, the GPS system. But that too has now been given up. We have no terrestrial system for medium or long range navigation around. Move forward onto the bridge, and we've got sort of integrated systems which are there. And these are to, again, evolve, in fact, safety, to ensure, in fact, that, in fact, our ships are navigated sometimes in a very sort of close waters and can, in fact, be optimized for the persons who are in control. And that particular configuration there of the Sperry integrated bridge system shows, in fact, two operator seats with a command space at the back, with, in fact, persons, in fact, glued to the screens to give them information from radar, from electronic navigation charts, and from other systems as to where they are. Again, this is a system which came into force in July 2006, I think it was, that the IBS sort of protocols were agreed. That is 16 years back. 2002, another movement forward was, in fact, the business of AIS, Automatic Identification Systems, a sort of really interesting development which allowed, in fact, any ship to interrogate any other ship and get information about the targeted ship or the ship of interest. And again, we're looking at 2002, when, in fact, carriage was mandated for vessels of 300 gross tons and on all fishing vessels by May 2014, just 8 years ago. And yet again, people think this is, in fact, has always been. It hasn't, but it gives information, provides opportunities for safer manoeuvring, and allows, in fact, persons to, in fact, interrogate other ships in the seas and see what they're doing. Charts have also developed, and the ECDIS, in fact, was developed and commenced in the 1970s. But it wasn't until, in fact, 2000 that standards were, in fact, established. And a little later, 2012 to 2018, it was rolled out. 2018 is 5 years ago. And so we have a developed system of electronic navigation charts. And of course, the value of electronic charts is, of course, we can put overlays over them, such as, in fact, radar systems, so that we can keep a control, if you like, over one single on one single instrument. But charts, okay, the paper chart, which I love and many people here will love, are now about to go. And it's anticipated that they will, in fact, conclude their sort of publication by the United Kingdom Hydrographic Office by late 2026. To many, this will be sad, because the chart was something you read. But it's 80% of all those buying charts today buy electronic charts, and there are many advantages and disadvantages for doing the charting in this system, in this way, in this manner. So our future is changing. Our future, if you like, as navigators, we're moving away from ordinary paper charts to electronic charts. We will be forced to go that way by 2026, when the UK Hydrographic Office stops printing the paper chart. Along with all the business of electronics goes the issue of vulnerability. And it's interesting to note that cybersecurity is a big issue. And here at Plymouth, we've got a cybership lab, which is unique to the United Kingdom, which is looking at and investigating issues associated with breaches of, in fact, the cyber information, which is so critical for today's ships and shipping. Again, it's lots of talk upon cyber technology, but again, it shows the way we're moving into this electronic world where we have to protect ourselves via, in fact, systems, which in the days of the paper chart, the days of the sextant, the days of the actual compass, we didn't have to worry about. We were all self-contained. The next movement forward is possibly to augmented reality. And in our conference, as I say, earlier this year, people were given the opportunity to view augmented reality systems. And the story about this is very simply that many, in fact, seafarers concerned with navigating have their faces in a box, looking downwards, not looking at the horizon, and not looking, in fact, where ships might be, because they can be missed, okay, for a variety of different reasons on the electronic systems. And so the idea of augmented reality is to actually have a system where you can look ahead, and either through, in fact, a set of head spectacles, for want of a better word, or indeed projected onto the screen, the windscreens of the vessel, one can in fact establish the information you need without having to look down. Very embryonic at the moment, but it is a possibility that this will sort of again excite people and in fact allow them to be able to read the information they need and have it all in one place for the safe conduct of the vessel, and thus the safe conduct of the vessel, then in fact the sustainable movement of the ship. In addition to the augmented technology, recently in fact introduced have been International Hydrographic Office new standards for a digital world called Standards S100. Not going to go into this very far, but this is the digital base from which, okay, our digital charts of the future will be produced. And through that sort of digital projections, they can produce imagery and bit of data. They can produce 3D representations, and there are many new applications that go well beyond the scope of traditional hydrography, which in fact will be able to be provided for the navigator. And so he will have the benefit of big data, as they call it, and the use of that big data in the development of future charts, electronic charts, and in the safety of the vessel, and indeed the better control of the vessel. Such things as moving into port areas, instead of having to move to an anchorage or so forth, you can control your time to the port, thus in fact control the amount of engine revolutions you need, thus control the speed of the engine, and thus in fact save again in terms of fuel use and hydrocarbons released. We move, of course, to the business of artificial intelligence. And I would guess that one of the best examples, of course, was Mayflower 400, which eventually got across the Atlantic during this year. And one can only say that on this unmanned surface vessel, it was making best use of these areas of navigation sensors, perception sensors, and indeed the use of sensors on propulsion and for ground control. Again, it's a huge area, but it's really good to see that Plymouth is actually controlling front of, in fact, artificial intelligence, big data, and in fact that is played in the true sense in the business of autonomous ships. This, of course, is a picture of Mayflower 400. She's a level 4 autonomous ship, and she achieved, in fact, crossing the Atlantic this year. On board that ship were many innovative activities going on. She was, in fact, thinking for herself and, in fact, guiding herself into ports. Also, she was using the Hydrographic Office S100 series data navigation data for testing purposes. And as far as I'm aware, that was proven to be successful. So we're moving forward. I was only going to be short on this, and I am. The future marine navigation is developing. There's no doubt about that. It's developing quickly. The pace of change is arguably increasing. And in fact, the British government is supporting, in fact, the development of autonomous systems in shipping. How far it will go, whether it will go to big container ships or not, we're not sure. But the aim is, in fact, to ensure a more sustainable and clean industry at the end of the day. So that's all I wanted to say. I've been short, okay, I hope. And it's just,